The British will promise anything to anyone if they think it will help them win the war. In 1915, Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Cairo, wants to encourage an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. He writes to Sharif Hussein, "As for the regions lying within the proposed frontiers, in which Great Britain is free to act without detriment to her ally France, I am authorised to give you the following pledges on behalf of the Government of Great Britain, and to reply to your note as follows. Great Britain is prepared to recognise and uphold the independence of the Arabs in all the regions lying within the frontiers proposed by the Sharif of Mecca." A year later, T. E. Lawrence of Arabia, writes an intelligence note to his British commanders and encouraged them to take the same course. He says it will be beneficial to us because it marches with our immediate aims: the breakup of the Islamic bloc, the defeat and disruption of the Ottoman Empire, and because the states that Sharif Hussein would set up to succeed the Turks would be harmless to ourselves. The Arabs are even less stable than the Turks, and if properly handled, they would remain in a state of political mosaic, a tissue of small, jealous principalities incapable of cohesion. Yet a year after this, Lord Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, made an incompatible promise to a small group within the international Jewish community, the Zionists. His declaration of November 1917 read as follows: His Majesty's Government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And he said that this should be with the understanding that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Two British promises about the same piece of land, self-determination for the Arabs and a homeland for the Jews. Both promises could not be kept, and it was the Balfour Declaration that was written into the treaties that ended the First World War. But treaties are just pieces of paper. Facts on the ground are a different thing. The British occupied Palestine in 1917, and after 1920 still ran Palestine under a mandate from the League of Nations.
There were perhaps 60,000 Jews in Palestine at the time, and 500,000 or more Arabs. The British, as a great power, believed that they could direct, manage, manipulate, and reconcile the two nationalisms. They were, after all, British creations. It was, after all, a British victory that enabled either side to get anything. So in 1920, Herbert Samuel arrived in Palestine to govern it for Britain as the first High Commissioner. Samuel had first circulated the cabinet with the national home idea in 1915, and was, as most Arabs perceived, a Jew. Palestine was to be ruled as a mandated territory. In other words, the newly formed League of Nations had given Britain a mandate to rule it in a particular way. The mandatory powers, Britain in Palestine, France in Syria and Lebanon, were in the role of friendly big brothers. They were to bring the natives on. But the British mandate for Palestine, which Herbert Samuel was to apply, differed from the others, for incorporated into it were the very words of the Balfour Declaration about establishing a Jewish national home. No longer a declaration of intent from a British government to a private citizen, but something with a claim to validity in international law.
And if you read the mandate that the British essentially wrote for themselves but was given to them by the League of Nations in a formal way, you look at that document and you see that the Palestinians, or the Arab population of Palestine as they were described at the time, were at the peripheries of this, that the main task of the mandate is the creation of the Jewish national home, and that the identity and the national identity of the Arab population is simply never mentioned within that document, and only by accident in a sense when it says that the Arabic language will be one of the three official languages of the mandate. So I think that's when we begin to see how the powerful impact of a colonial period. After all, the end of the First World War did not see self-determination. It saw the idea of the mandate system in which these former Turkish territories were to be under the tutelage of, in inverted commas, an advanced nation, and Britain was that advanced nation. Of course, Britain then began to implement this mandate extremely badly. Its administration was quite chaotic. which of course led not only to the inability to create the Jewish national home, but also in fact produced the Arab revolt in the 1930s.
There were perhaps 60,000 Jews in Palestine at the time, and 500,000 or more Arabs. The favour bestowed on the Jews by Sir Herbert Samuel made the Arabs angry and afraid. They felt it to be unjust. What it all amounted to was something very simple. The Arabs did not want foreign Jews in large numbers in their country. The atmosphere in 1920 and 21 was tense. The Arabs complained bitterly about the way they were being treated. But all this was to no purpose. The new Colonial Secretary, Winston Churchill, visited Palestine in 1921. "It is not in my power," he said then, "to repudiate the Balfour Declaration." The mandate stood. The deal Britain had made, the undertaking given, and the British interests served by it, this is what mattered to the British. Arab unrest led him a year later to issue a white paper, calculated to cool them down. But on the crucial and explosive issues, the right of Jews to go there, to live there as of rights, to buy land, invest, build up their own political institutions, on all these, Churchill would not compromise. On these, he gave nothing of substance. It was this, the resolute and determined support given by successive British governments, which enabled the Jewish nationalist movement in Palestine to take root there and grow.
Without the Balfour Declaration, there could have been no genuine development of a Jewish national home, and the follow-through in 1948, where you get the creation of a State of Israel, simply would not have happened. It requires the umbrella of the British to be there, in effect, to support the emerging Jewish national home, militarily at the bottom line. The very fact that there are British troops, British policemen there to protect the Jewish communities is ultimately central to the situation. It could not have been done in any other way.
The Balfour Declaration changed Zionism overnight from a fantasy to a possibility by providing it with the endorsement of the paramount imperial power of the day. With the Balfour Declaration, Zionism took giant strides towards what Mr. Brown called the achievement of 1948, the hauteur of the towards the Palestinians of Mr. Brown's predecessor at Whitehall is best exemplified by the following words of Balfour himself, written in 1919. Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. Unquote. In the same memorandum, Balfour went on, whatever deference should be paid to the views of those who live there, i.e. in Palestine, the powers in their selection of a mandatory do not propose, as I understand the matter, to consult with them. The achievement of 1948, lauded by Mr. Brown, has, as we can see from these words, a pretty long British pedigree. By riding piggyback on imperial mandatory Britain, Zionism launched its reconquista against the Palestinians by proxy, with British bayonets. Coercion was integral to Britain's assumption of the Palestine Mandate without consulting Palestinian wishes. The intrusiveness of Britain's rule in Palestine because of its Jewish national home policy, was more devastating than that of any of the other colonialist regimes along the Mediterranean littoral, including Mussolini's Libya and France's Algérie française.
Britain had no moral or political or legal right to promise the land that belonged to the Arabs to another people. So the Balfour Declaration was both immoral and illegal.